Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. I've received a few requests from some of my viewers to talk about the judgment in which Johnny was granted relief from sanctions with regards to the UK libel case. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the positives that have come out of this judgment, as well as some setbacks for Johnny's team. We're going to start off by looking at why relief was granted, because there are a few things that do need to be cleared up, such as the issue of who was responsible for not submitting the Australia text messages. So specifically, the court had to consider three main factors when making a decision: the seriousness of the breach, why it occurred, and whether it would be just to grant relief. In relation to the first consideration of whether the breach was serious, the judge found that it was indeed serious because it was a breach of an unless order. Now, an unless order is basically, unless you do this, your claim will be struck out, which is what the court had made clear to Johnny and his team back in March of this year. Johnny's side did not contest this finding. Secondly, and most importantly, why did the breach occur? A lot of people think that Johnny deliberately hid the evidence because it painted him in a bad light. Well, it turns out that Schillings, which is the law firm that instructs Johnny's barristers who represent him in court, were actually responsible for this oversight. Miss Afia, who is a lawyer, stated in her witness statement that Johnny did in fact supply the law firm with these text messages, and they made their own call with regards to whether they should submit them or not. So they erroneously decided that they didn't have to be submitted because they misapplied Rule 31.6. So they mistakenly believed that this evidence did not support the defendant's case and did not adversely affect Johnny's case. And finally, the last point to consider: would it be just or fair to grant relief? NGN posed a number of arguments as to why it would not be fair and just to grant relief. Firstly, they argued that but for Amber's involvement by supplying NGN's lawyer with this evidence, it would never have come to light, and therefore they would never have been able to rely on it in trial. Secondly, NGN claimed that Johnny further misled the court by stating that he was not in possession of a recorded argument that took place between him and Amber called Argument 2. It turns out that, once again, the law firm Schillings missed the tapes, so it was another oversight, and that there was no intention to mislead the court or the defendants. The judge accepted this explanation. Thirdly, there is Amber's breach of the protective order that was imposed on the evidence used in the Virginia trial, so the separate US defamation case. This protective order rendered the evidence restricted in use outside of that court's proceedings. Therefore, by giving that evidence to NGN for use in the UK case, Amber breached that protective order. Johnny's lawyers in the US have written to Amber's lawyers and told them that they will be seeking sanctions in the States for this breach. NGN are claiming that these are threats and that they should not be condoned. Also, I do want to tell you that I will be sharing with you and discussing the judge's findings on pretty much each and every one of these allegations. So I'm just listing them for you right now, and then after that, we can address them. NGN further claimed that they can't possibly have a fair trial because they're alleging that there is potentially more evidence that's been overlooked or withheld from them. They also allege that Johnny can be vindicated in the US. He doesn't need to take the defendants to courts in the UK in order to be absolved. And finally, they argued if the trial was to go ahead, it would absorb vast resources. And this is because the court service has agreed to make 5 courtrooms to be used specifically for this case. If you'll remember from my previous video with reference to Rule 3.9 of the Civil Procedure Rules, I stated that the court will most likely consider the fact that the trial was right around the corner. and that this consideration would most likely be in favor of granting relief. That was indeed found to be an important factor when deciding whether to grant relief or not. The judge also found that the breach was indeed an honest mistake and an oversight, rather than a deliberate and deceptive maneuver to conceal evidence. With regards to Amber's breach of the protective order that was imposed on the Virginia trial's evidence, it's important to know that it was actually Johnny's lawyer who offered to make an undertaking to not pursue any legal action against Amber for that breach. The judge merely agreed with that offer. A lot of people seem to think that it was the judge who came up with that kind of compromise. I suspect that Mr. Sherborne, or Mr. Sherbin, however you want to pronounce it, in Australia, the city of Melbourne is pronounced Melbourne, even though it's written Melbourne. So don't jump down my throat if I'm mispronouncing his name. I looked it up and apparently both of them are valid. I suspect that Mr. Sherborne made this offer in order to ensure or to maximize the chances of relief being granted for his client. So it was a deliberate compromise, and obviously he's a great lawyer and he knew exactly what he was doing because the judge immediately latched onto it and agreed with it. Just remember that Mr. Sherborne's duty to his client, Johnny, exists within the confines of the UK libel case. His job is to ensure that his client's case goes ahead by securing relief and ultimately winning that case. His concerns are not necessarily tied to the US Virginia case. So despite the fact that this undertaking is a blow to Johnny because now he can't go after Amber for breaching the protective order, it did in fact contribute greatly to ensuring that relief was granted. The judge also rejected NGN's argument that Johnny shouldn't be granted relief because of all the other possible evidence that could have been overlooked and therefore not submitted in the discovery process. The evidence in issue, namely the Australia texts, were found to be the only evidence that should be considered when granting relief, and not any other possible evidence that could have been overlooked. In relation to NGN's claim that Johnny can be vindicated in the US, the judge found that that was an unreasonable argument to make and rejected it because Johnny had the right to address any claims laid against him in the UK by a British newspaper that was circulated to readers in the UK. The judge also found that in the US, the trial would be by jury. And as a rule, the jury are not required to submit reasons for their decision, whereas decisions by judges are always accompanied by reasons. Therefore, Johnny or the defendants would have the advantage of receiving reasons for whatever decision is ultimately made. This can also contribute in giving the parties a sense of closure. And yes, I do want to point out that in the UK and in Australia and in other jurisdictions, civil trials such as defamation trials are not run by jury unless the court elects to do so. In the US, there will be a trial by jury even though it's a civil case, and that is the default way of doing things in the States. There is no discretion as far as I'm aware. So I did want to make that clear because I have received a few questions with regards to the presence or absence of a jury in the UK case. And finally, in relation to the claim that this case would absorb a vast amount of resources, the judge agreed with Johnny's lawyers when they claimed that the additional resources, such as the use of the 5 courtrooms, was a direct result of the current situation with the pandemic that we are going through. It has nothing to do with Johnny's case per se. Social distancing measures have to be observed whatever trial takes place. Okay, so that's the good news and the explanation behind the decision to grant relief out of the way. This hearing also involved a number of requests from Johnny's side to compel Amber to hand over additional evidence in the form of recordings, photographs, and communications. This is the part of the judgment that a lot of my viewers were not necessarily happy with. On the 16th of June of this year, the defendant sent Johnny's side a tape recording along with a transcript of that recording. The recording is of a conversation that took place between Amber and Johnny in San Francisco on the 22nd of July, 2016. It's important to note that during this time, the temporary restraining order that Amber took out against Johnny in May was still active. This recording was not disclosed as part of the Virginia proceedings. So it's been alleged that the recording is poor in quality and inaudible in some parts, and the transcript that has been provided is not agreed to by Johnny's side. So Johnny's team sought a court order to compel Amber to submit the original or a copy of this recording in the hopes that it would be of better quality because it supports Johnny's case and is adverse to Amber's case. I mentioned just now that the temporary restraining order was still active. This is important because Amber chose to meet with Johnny alone to have this conversation, which is usually against the purpose of a restraining order. In the eyes of the law, when you take out a restraining order against someone and then you voluntarily agree to see them, it really does not look good for you as the victim or the alleged victim who is requesting protection. It diminishes from your credibility. It makes it look as though you aren't really afraid of your alleged perpetrator. So on the tape, Amber can apparently be heard begging Johnny for a hug, and she did not contest or deny any of Johnny's claims that she was the one who was physically abusive towards him on the 21st of April 2016, the night of her 30th birthday party. So you can see why Johnny's side is claiming that this evidence is clearly in favor of Johnny's case and is adverse to NGN's case. The judge found that there is no definitive proof, or that Johnny's side has not submitted any definitive proof, that Amber does have the original version of this recording or a different copy at all. So purely based on this fact alone, she cannot possibly be forced to produce something that does not definitively exist. The judge did say that Johnny was free to relay his version of events during the trial and that he was free to contradict what's heard on the tape and written in the transcript. Now, I don't know better than a judge. I'm just a lowly junior, relatively inexperienced lawyer. I see where he's coming from. So it's not necessarily a matter of the judge refusing to order her to produce this despite knowing that she has it. It's just a matter of the court being unable to issue an order to produce something that potentially doesn't exist. So there's apparently a second recording called the Toronto tapes of a conversation that took place around September 2015 in Toronto, Canada. Johnny alleges that despite stating that she would provide him with these recordings on multiple occasions, she has failed to do so. She has also never denied the existence of these recordings. So Johnny's side requested the court to order Amber to disclose these tapes, but the judge denied this request. Now, the judge accepts that Johnny has shown that these tapes have existed at least at one point in time. So their existence is not in issue or in doubt. However, as per the civil procedure rules, in order for the court to order Amber to produce these tapes, it must be shown that these tapes contain evidence that would support Johnny's claim or adversely affect NGN's claim. All that Mr. Sherborne submitted was that this conversation took place at a critical time of the relationship. But the judge found that nothing was presented to show that the contents of that tape clearly support Johnny's case and or are adverse to NGN's case. So essentially, Johnny's side needed to be more specific as to why these tapes satisfy the civil procedure rules, and unfortunately, Johnny's side did not specifically do that. I have to admit that this is a potential blow to Johnny's side because these tapes could have had incriminating evidence against Amber and therefore against NGN's case. And unfortunately, now we're never going to know. It's important to note that the judge was merely following the rules, and that's just the decision that he decided to arrive at. When it comes to evidence, it's all about specifics. You need to clearly establish the link of relevance and probative value. It's an important threshold and a roadblock that ensures that only the most relevant and material evidence is allowed into court. Now, we know that Amber took photographs of the alleged destruction that Johnny caused during their fights, and apparently she only submitted part of these to be used in the UK trial. Johnny's legal team applied to the court to compel her to produce all photographs, But once again, the judge denied this request. The judge found that whatever photographs were submitted by Amber were sufficient for the purposes of this trial. So if Johnny's team want to allege that they were staged, they can allege that by utilizing the available photographs. And the judge couldn't see how supplying additional photographs would help Johnny's case in any way or would be adverse to the defendant's case in any way. I do completely understand why Johnny's legal team would want all the photographs, because the more photos you have, the more material they would have in pointing out that these photographs were staged. But on the other hand, it can also be seen that these photos, if anything, would only serve to support NGN's case, because they would be seen as further photographic evidence of the physical destruction that was allegedly caused by Johnny. So if the main goal is merely to point out that these photos were staged, then the judge was right in saying that nothing is really stopping Johnny's side from doing that with the available photos. Don't forget that this judgment and this entire hearing took place really late in the timeline, because the trial is set to start on the 7th of July. So requesting any further evidence at this point can cause unnecessary delays in the proceedings. Evidence with regards to Amber's extramarital affairs also came up in this hearing. So Johnny's legal team sought to compel Amber to submit all communications that took place between her and the men that visited her at the penthouse during May 2016. Johnny's legal team believed that they could use this evidence to refute Amber's claims that Johnny was irrationally jealous and accusing her of having affairs when he had no basis to do so. The judge denied this request. In his re-amended reply, Johnny denied Amber's allegations that he was imagining things and that he was accusing her of having affairs without any basis. But that's as far as he went. The judge found that it was never properly pleaded that Amber was indeed having affairs. Specifically, the judge found that if it was the claimant's case that his concern about Miss Heard's infidelity was justified, that should have been more clearly pleaded. It is not, and the bare denial of the allegation is not, in my view, sufficient. And ultimately, the judge found that even if it could be proved that Amber was engaged in extramarital affairs, that bears no relevance to the fact in issue in the libel case, namely whether Johnny was indeed physically abusive to Amber or not. So basically the judge is saying people can engage in extramarital affairs. That doesn't automatically disprove or negate the allegations of domestic violence that they may have made against their partner, which strictly in the sense of evidence law and the rules of evidence is true. I'm not gonna lie, this is another area where I am torn, specifically actually in the defamation case where Amber is the named defendant rather than this one where NGN are the defendants. And I've talked about this in previous videos where evidence of cheating goes directly to character and to some extent credibility, right? Therefore, you have a propensity to lie and to make things up and to conceal things. And basically, you're not an honest individual, which is a really important thing when it comes to defamation, right? Because the main element is that the publication was false. However, because of the really strict rules of evidence in the law, which exist for a very good reason, the fact that someone is engaging in extramarital affairs really does nothing in disproving allegations of domestic abuse. Do you see how they can coexist? You can be abused by your partner and you can also cheat on them at the same time. In fact, maybe some people are driven to cheat because they are being abused. So it's really difficult to reconcile that evidence as relevant strictly when you consider the laws of evidence. But when you think about it from a more human perspective, a less detached and strict objective view, an argument can be made that this goes to their credibility. And a lot of you have expressed that in the comments, and I want to acknowledge that. But I also really want to reinforce the fact and remind you that the laws of evidence and evidentiary rules are very strict. And what applies in the court of public opinion does not necessarily apply in a court of law. Finally, I want to mention that Johnny's side also sought evidence of any communications that transpired between Elon Musk and Amber in the period between the 1st of March 2015 to the 21st of May 2016, and the judge rejected this request for the exact same reasons that we just talked about. That was a lot to get through. I really hope it answers a lot of your questions, because I did receive a lot of questions with regards to this judgment. Overall, I think we need to focus on the bright side and the fact that this trial has not gone to waste. It is allowed to progress, and it will be interesting to see how it turns out. So yeah, the trial is due to start tomorrow. It is the 6th of July where I'm at, and the trial is due to start on July the 7th. It's expected to go on for 3 weeks. In all honesty, Mr. Justice Nicol seems to be a very fair judge based on the decisions that I've read regarding this case. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll catch you in a future video.